Today we will be ranking interior design styles from best to worst, and we will do this based on how compatible they are with houses, meaning how suitable they are for a house design, because not all architectural or interior styles are meant for houses, nor does every style apply the same for all building types. We have factories, schools, office buildings, restaurants, etc. And I think it is obvious that you cannot apply one single style to all these buildings in the same way. I mean, yes, you can have an industrial style cafe, for example, but does that mean you'll be doing the same functions you do in a cafe the same way if it was built in a more familiar style? I don't think so, because my theory is that each function has a much more suitable design meant for them. So today we will be reviewing 4 interior styles and see how good they are for house designs. And this is going to be a series. I'm going to be reviewing more styles in the future. So comment which style I should be doing next, like and subscribe, and let's get into it. We are already starting this ranking with a really radical style. I think it's obvious where brutalist architecture goes when it comes to how compatible they are with houses in this ranking. But I'm not going to just put it in F tier, because that's obviously where it belongs. I also want to talk about why that is the case. When it comes to material and the color palette of brutalist architecture, it is monochromatic and, materially speaking, very harsh. It is not like any other architectural style. We are talking about concrete everywhere, and I mean concrete everywhere, which is always gray. So you have only one color to deal with. So the material is harsh, and the color of the material is harsh too. We don't even have a warm color to at least combat the harshness of the material. No, everything is harsh, and when it comes to places like houses, that's the exact opposite of what we should be aiming for. I think this criticism that I'm giving on brutalist architecture is not new, because when you go online and you see people making fun of this style, saying things like, your house is basically a bunker. Are you getting ready for the apocalypse? Is there a nuclear fallout you are preparing for? And when I go online, I see people trying to humanize this type of style. One of the methods they use is to put vegetation basically everywhere they can. Another trend that I see when it comes to brutalism is building these houses in the middle of jungles and forests where there is a lot of vegetation and greenery to humanize the context. This is actually called brutalist tropical modernism, which is basically brutalism in the middle of jungles. And if you ask me, it does look good, but we don't all have the money to buy a plot of land in the middle of the jungle and build our houses there. So even when it comes to the economic aspect of this style, it still lags behind, and that's why brutalism goes into E tier. Now let's take a look at Japandi. So Japandi is basically an East meets West aesthetic thing, where it tries to mix the functionality of Scandinavian architecture and the Japanese rustic minimalism, also known as wabi-sabi. The fact that it integrates wabi-sabi into the style is a really good sign, because wabi-sabi is a design principle that tries to make your interior as natural as possible by embracing imperfections. But I think there is a contradiction in this whole Japan style when it comes to embracing and merging it with Scandinavian architecture. If you go online and look at Scandinavian architecture, you will notice that in the interior and even in the exterior, they try to achieve this perfectionism when it comes to both the finishes and the massings. So when it comes to Japandi, I noticed this uncanny result because of a Scandinavian perfectionism and the Japanese wabi-sabi principle. But that's maybe because my eyes are playing tricks on me, and actually not, because they do look off, to be honest. They look like the uncanny valley, but the interior style version of it. And when it comes to materiality and the color palette, it is so boring, and I mean like really dull. So Japandi style mainly relies on soft tone materials and colors, things like wood and earthy color tones, and that's it. There is no addition of any strong colors or strong materials to add some contrast. Plus, if you ask me to compare it to other boring styles, I would compare it to something like millennial gray, except that in this example, it is not millennial gray, it's millennial beige. But of course, it's not as harsh as millennial gray. At least this style tries to use natural materials like wood, and the color palette's not as harsh. So since it sits in a limbo perfectly in the middle, I will put it in C tier. Okay, just to be frank, I'm going to be a little bit biased when it comes to mid-century modernism because it's one of my favorite styles of all time. But it is one of my favorite styles because of objective reasons. But anyways, as the name suggests, mid-century modernism was popular between the 40s and the 70s. Now, compared to Brutalism and Japandi, mid-century modernism, when it comes to materials and the color palette, does have a really good combination of those. Now, of course, compared to Brutalism, any style can be better than Brutalism when it comes to materials and colors. Obviously, anything can defeat a gray slab of concrete. But when we compare to styles like Japandi, the strength of mid-century modernism shines. Just like I said with Japandi, mid-century modernism also uses natural materials and it tries to use natural tones like wood. Though there is this much needed contrast that we have talked about which lacks in Japandi. Not everything is monotone in beige. Mid-century modern interior design blends a mix of natural materials like stone, wood, and brick with modern materials like concrete, steel, and glass. I'm talking about glasses. Windows in mid-century modern architecture are bigger because at the time it was a trend in the modern movement. We see this in houses like the Farnsworth house, where we try to create a connection with the outside using these big glass windows. Structurally speaking, mid-century modern houses tend to be most of the time one story tall, which makes the scale more human. Another thing that I really like when it comes to making the scale more fitting to humans is the low ceiling heights. I have talked about ceiling heights before in other videos if you want to check it out. But the rule is that the higher the ceiling gets, the less containment it creates in the space, which leads to alienation. Mid-century modernism with its low ceiling heights is a really great example for this. With its low ceiling heights, it creates a space that gives you a sense of containment and coziness. And I also really want to talk about one of my favorite trends when it comes to mid-century modernism, which was popularized by this style, by the way. I'm talking about talking pits, of course. Talking pits are basically a part of your plan which is sunken to a lower level. This space functions as the seating area in your living room. The seating area is defined by a clear sense of space, and sticking this space to a lower level makes it more cozy and more intimate. That's something which is perfect because it gives you a sense of containment that we've talked about earlier. And unlike Brutalist architecture, where we talked about earlier with the tropical modernist type, mid-century modernism can be applied in all contexts, whether it's places like suburbs, the middle of the jungle, in remote areas, or in the urban centers. Having said all of this, mid-century modernism easily gets into A tier. Unlike mid-century modernism and brutalism, which are very well-known architectural styles, and Japandi being a trendy one, Memphis Milano is not as known as these three. Memphis Milano, also known as Memphis Group, was started by the Italian architect Ettore Sozzas, and I wish I pronounced his name right. And it was active between 1980 to 1987. Since it was a style based on the postmodernist movement, it has the elements of postmodernism, which goes against modern architecture. And this is very obvious and taken to the extreme in the case of Memphis Milano style, where we see the usage of colorful and abstract shapes that we don't usually see regularly in furniture. Materially speaking, it is the exact opposite of Japandi. We see the usage of tiles which are glossy, terrazzo, plastic, and other strong materials. This material palette combined with the color palette gives us what we can call chaotic result, especially since the style itself is maximalist both in quantity and in design. The same principle applies on an architectural level too, where we see strange massing and floor plan layouts. The works of the Portugal-based architecture office Fall Atelier is a really great example for this. style, and especially since they have residential projects, I think we will take some examples from their works. But before looking at their works, I want to classify their works as Memphis minimalism, since we don't see that same maximalism that is associated with Memphis Milano. We will look at the project named House in Fontaines. The first thing that we see when we are looking at the elevation is the usage of abstract shapes, even in the railings, for example, which is supposed to be purely functional. Also, the addition of these shapes for non-functional reasons, as we see on the top of the elevation. When we go inside, we see the same principle, plus the strong material and color palette. We see it in the kitchen, the bath, and here again with the rails. And just like I said before, the color palette is the complete opposite of Japandi. Looking at the floor plan, we see the same unusual shapes in the layout. This area here ends in a sharp angle. This space is divided with a diagonal line, etc. So with all of this said, I will put Memphis Milano on C tier, but of course better than Japandi. Though I will put Memphis Minimalism on B tier because I personally like the works of Fall Atelier. Okay, so this was my ranking of these styles. Tell me if you agree or disagree in the comments, and write which styles I should do next. Like and subscribe, and bye.